All right, hey, good morning, guys. Well, here's a video update of what I was able to discover last night, this morning with this Oracle Cloud infrastructure. I don't think this is possible out of the box. I don't think we have an image that can be just directly built. I think like Azure and Amazon that we need custom images and other things to be done. So I'm going to real quickly go through what I had to do just so you see where I'm at and what probably just needs to be left to investigate and understand the impact and how much time would be done for, I guess, for the development. So the first thing is we cannot use just the base image. It does allow for a VMDK to be imported. However, that image that has to be imported from a VMDK needs to be a custom image, which means that it needs to be already laid out in its file system, all of its boot parameters, and a full operating system image, which means it's a Sapphire image after the initial boot and configuration of its address. It's very similar to what we're doing right now with, again, the Azure and others, where we're doing some scripts to upload the image, build it, install the modules and configuration. So what I had to do is in my virtual system, which I have one, I went out and took the typical image, imported it, ran the configuration, set the IP address for it, and then in my ESX server, I had to export that fully configured address or fully configured image. And that created a OVF and a VMDK file, image file, disk file, that I could then use for the import into the cloud. So once I had that VMDK disk file and the object storage, we had a bucket for dip that I went out and uploaded the disk VMDK. As you can see, I have the typical VM file here as well, which isn't applicable here. We can't just use the default. So again, this one's already configured, so it was set up to allow that. I then, through setting up the custom images that they provide, went in and imported and created the image using that VMDK, which then created what I can then move forward with to build a new instance. I then created the instance, and in this process is where you're defining the availability domains, what regions will serve this in terms of the cloud. This is the name I had pre-built. It's a 300 gig drive, virtual machine, and then the resources we select. I had it configured, pre-configured in my built system to do 2 CPUs, less memory, but this is, I guess, equivalent. And then the networking here, which still doesn't work, is defined. But then also your SSH keys. Now this is very important because the way that you interface with this serial console, which is supported, is through a VNC client. So like Azure and the training we did there, you do need the public key, which you would copy and paste and generate, set up your key passphrase and save it with RSA, and then paste that into the instance for that image. You also, on the client, and we're going to get to this shortly, is you need to have a private key. So you need to export while you're here the open SSH key, and I had done this already, and is stored in the ID underscore RSA. So we'll come back to this in a second. So once you've installed that or recreated it, it supposedly goes out and builds that instance, creates one supported interface. You can only have one network interface initially. Anything that's built into the VMDK gets dropped or just doesn't get imported. So I think there's some network incompatibilities, I know there is, that we need to determine the build for. But it did keep the drive and the memory and everything else. So once the image instance was created, effectively the way you connect to this information is to recreate that instance and store it, and you create a connection. So I had gone down to a console connection. In the process creating, I'm not going to do it again, but I create this and I again paste in the public key into this connection. And then I have this link, once it's defined, that gives me a VNC shell, which is effectively a SSH tunnel that redirects 443 to 5900 for VNC clients. So I had to open up a shell window, which I have this open now. That shell window, I then can access to a client. And the thing about the client is you need to have a um, VNC client that supports either Windows that you can run locally or through Linux like I have here, and fortunately have the ability to pull up a client, but I don't know how that would be necessarily possible otherwise. Let me exit out here as I already have this open. But in the VNC, in my applications, Tiger VNC, LibreOffice, I didn't want that. Aside from all the side clicks. Internet, Tiger VNC, localhost, port 5900. That then connects us to the VNC SSH. And in the process of doing this, it was reading behind the scenes my public and private key, those two that we just defined in the keygen. So you need to make sure that in your Linux client that you're running this VNC client from, in the home directory.ssh, you need to have the private key, which is the IDRSA, intact, and then the public key, IDRSA pub. Now, the challenge here then is, I could then log in, I could take a look at all of the configurations effectively, but I could not see the network interfaces. It shows me that it has an IP address, it has the name, it has everything I had pre-configured, but when I, again, navigate to the configuration network and interfaces, I do not see any GLAN stuff. I see the management interface, which shows me what it's capable of connecting to, and it thinks that there should be GLAN, GLAN 2, but there is none in this driver, so it's not compatible at that point. So I think at this point, if we can get to that, the interface is set up or determine what needs to be done, it will require development and whatever the project details would be. So, well, that's where I'm at. It's a lot of hours to do that, but effectively, I don't see another way unless we understand what the drivers look like. So anyway, that's it, guys. Thanks. Let me know if you have any questions.